reflects every permaculture garden is unique because it reflects the uniqueness of that moment. The place, the people, the available resources, and hi, Lindsay. And obviously the intended function. Important idea. I'm just chatting really to keep everyone entertaining. Yeah, just looking through a few random pictures on my desktop, actually, just as talking points, because obviously I'm involved in different conversations about permaculture, different places. And the course that we've just finishing, and I've still been talking to these people all afternoon, are the team in Kumi in Uganda, which is nice to see them at their training centre. Different teaching resources. And patterns. This is a really famous rock painting in Uganda. And on the subject of patterns, I like to reference it. So one of the students just sent me this picture just a couple of minutes ago of them it's very old. It's thousands of years old rock painting in part of eastern Uganda, and it's beautiful. Anyway, so just a little. And I wanted to show you Clovis's compost heap. He just sent me that as well. So this is Clovis. He's a refugee from Congo, and he's on our Sector 39 training team in eastern Uganda. And he's been doing that practical. And I've asked him to keep the compost heap, kind of keep looking after it. And so he's turned it. That's a beautiful, that's about 2 meter cubed sized heap. So that's a good old compost heap, that is. So he's very proud of that. And meanwhile, in Save, in our Save school in Rwanda, this is Rose, and she's been propagating avocados. So she wanted you to know about that. And this is a nursery that she's developing within the school in Save school in Rwanda, where she's been landscaping the landscape. She's been designing and putting in big swale systems, like we saw in Chimanimani. And these are the plants that she's now going to use to stabilize the swale system. And she's sort of got a little team of people around her to help. So, I've been inspired by the things that I've seen, like, say, that system in Chikukwa, and to be able to, 20 years later, be working with people in a different country in Rwanda to do something kind of similar. It's very exciting. And there's something about how permaculture ideas can propagate. These things can pop up everywhere, like little seeds, these little pioneer trees. We were talking about the seeds go a long way. Oh gosh, that's the sky over California looking down on the fires. That's just frightening. And anyway, here's the team. This is the course we've just finished. We had, I don't know, I can't quite count how many people. I think we had 32 participants and 7 trainers on a course. They've just done 6 days, intensive training. Very similar content to what you're doing, but with a slightly different flavor, different emphasis. What they're going to do now is they've drawn a personal action plan. They've drawn ideas, the things that inspired them from within their course that resonated with them. They've now created a little list of things to do when they get home. They're going to try and, whether it's start their compost heap or their particular raised bed, or start propagating some plants, or whatever else it might be that they're doing. And then our trainers are going to go and visit them in field, in their home, and see how they're getting on, see if they've got stuck, help them with any sort of, sticking points or any problems. So I think this is a very interesting format of how to do PDC training, where perhaps, you do an intensive part and then you then go and support people within their communities. And what's so exciting about this, and what we just achieved with this, is that of those 39 people, 40 people, about 35 of them are all from the same district in Uganda. They're all from Teso sub-region, whatever, this particular district of Uganda. So again, there's a cluster effect from having lots of people together that can work together. So these are all things that we're thinking about in terms of using a permaculture design as an educational tool. So to support cluster elements together to create really strength, and to create sort of that function of education is invested in lots of people in a particular place. I don't know. Anyway, maybe I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but I thought I'd just share those things as a warm up. I'm going to just show just a very short snatch of video as a kind of introduction to a topic, and then we're going to get more into this subject over the next, really more tomorrow, but I wanted to start it now. I'm just going to show about 8 minutes of this.
Monocultural industrial agriculture. This is sugarcane, and nothing but sugarcane as far as the eye can see. No interactions, no diversity, nothing that harmonizes with the natural system. This doesn't occur in nature. Let's have a look at the soil here and see what it actually looks like. Oh, although this is actually a plowed field, I can hardly break up the soil. We've just got incredibly hard, compacted, dead soil. How did we end up like this? How did we end up supplying the food and the needs of humanity through totally unnatural processes, through simplistic systems? Famous chemist in history, von Liebig, in the 1800s, discovered how he could manufacture sulfuric acid and then break down rocks, basic elements, and make a salt-based fertilizer, just using NPK. That is all a plant needs to grow. That is our basic fertilizer. But for a plant to be really healthy, we need the additions of other elements to build its body. And that's where we've gone wrong. And we have no favouring of the soil through the salt-based fertilizers. They do not favour the soil life. So once we started this industrial fertilizer process, the soil fertility was continuously declining. And the costs are continuously rising, and they continue to rise in industrial agriculture, where with our organic and designed ecosystemic systems, our costs are dropping all the time, and the quality of our product is rising, and so is the quality of our soil. And that's what this video is all about. And we're going to take you through all the steps of composting, organic matter return, interactions with animals, plants, trees, and wildlife, with the lessons of how to do it so you can feel more secure about your future food security and health. Hi, I'm Jeff Lawton, and this is Zaytuna Farm. I'm on roughly an acre of ground here, and you can see the animals grazing in the background. And there's quite a few animals there, and we have a few more horses and sheep and larger animals. We have chickens and poultry on the farm, and it looks like quite a lot of biomass. But the real biomass is in the topsoil. Here's a teaspoon of soil here. And in this teaspoon, there's 1 billion bacteria, 1 million fungi, 10,000 amoebas. There's little protozoas and nematodes. The weight of biomass is actually the soil life. There can be easily 40 tons of life in an acre of topsoil, can be up to 200 tons of life in an acre of topsoil. What we have done with the soil life is we've destroyed it by digging and ploughing and turning the soil over. Now that does create fertility. If you start off with an ecosystem and you cut it down, you take away the product or you burn it, whatever you do with the living elements that are above the soil, and then you plough the soil and you turn that soil over, you destroy the soil life. And their dead bodies is the fertility that's released to the crops. So you're running on the dead organisms. Now, there's a timeline for that. It's a finite resource. If you're not farming in a harmonious way, if you're not gardening in a harmonious way, where you're putting back as much as you're taking out, it is going to end sooner or later. The real life, the real partnership we have to understand for sustainable design is partnering with the life in the soil. There is a really exciting web of life in the soil. It's an enormous diversity of organisms that can't photosynthesize, so they have to link to plants. And the ability for plants to capture carbon through photosynthesis and create exudates off their roots, which the organisms live from and exchange to with minerals. So the fungi, the bacteria, the protozoas, the nematodes, they go on out to larger organisms like worms and insects, right up to the large mammals, all interacting with that carbon exchange. It's an enormous diversity, and it's the diversity that gives it the quality and builds the quantity of beneficial, high-quality soil. So it's a very, very exciting and not much understood world of organisms, all in continuous symbiotic relationships, benefiting each other, extending all sorts of elements and minerals out through soil interdependency. It's a living system. Soil is alive, and that's what we have to work with. That's the important thing. That's where we have to link back to get a fertile, productive world.
Sorry, I'll stop there before we'll get dragged into it. But it's great. That's Jeff Lawton, the beginning of his soil video, and just wanted to kind of frame the subject of soil. So if we've all got to build a relationship with plants, because only plants can translate solar energy into matter, then the plants can't do that without soil. And soil's absolutely understanding soil. What did he say? We are partnering with the life in the soil, because it's the life in the soil that is the fertility. Because we've seen pictures of fertilizer tractors throwing mineral salts on the ground, we've in some ways thought about fertility as a kind of as a mineral salt. It's not that. It's the bacteria. It's the life in the soil. That's the very thing that's supplying the fertility to the plants. He talked about 40 tons of microbial life in an acre of soil, maybe up to 200 tons. So again, just reinforcing, going back to that idea that most of life is microbial, most of life is in the soil, most of life is actually at that place, at the interface between, I don't know, breaking down as the decomposes. It's a really, really complex, long-term process of dead material being broken down by not just a saprophyte. A saprophytic organism is something that lives on dead matter. So let's, for example, think of fungi that break down dead carbon, you know, old bits of wood, something like an oyster mushroom. That oyster mushroom is a primary saprophyte. It can eat, yeah, it can eat the wood, it can eat the dead wood. And what that digests that into creates a digestate. It's a product, a secondary level product. And then there's a whole layer of bacteria that are secondary saprophytes. They eat the residues, if you like, from the debris from the previous generation. And then there's tertiary saprophytes. Then there's the ones that actually specialize in biodegrading the digestate of the secondary saprophytes. So they're highly specific things. And Paul Stamets, the mycologist, thinks that these tertiary saprophytes are long-term habitat engineers that are anticipating what the biochemistry of the soil might be over a period of like 1,000 years or something. In some ways, that there's different time frames going on within the surface of the forest, within the soils, and within all these different layers of mycelium, maintaining long-term consistent environments. So when you plow stuff, you really mess all of that up. There's a first thought. And I think we've maybe misunderstood our relationships with soils, because especially in temperate soils, we can do all sorts of terrible things to temperate soils, and they keep forgiving because they're deep and dark and they have represent a large energy reserve. But actually, tropical soils aren't the same. They break down much quicker, and the energies are cycling on a much faster time frame. So at any one time, there's much less energy actually in the soil. Anyway, we'll enlarge on all of these things, but I wanted to bring sort of open up the subject on a few of these things. And I also thought is, especially perhaps for an evening lecture, is I wanted to go in and perhaps and look at some applications. I thought we've been talking about these principles of permaculture. And firstly, we've thought about, yes, change, observation, and then the next principle that we're going to look at is catch and store energy. And I always try and get people begin to introduce the subject of soil at this stage, because to me, soil is an energy store or a translator of energy. And that's something that we're having to, especially through permaculture, we're trying to build a conscious relationship with that. And the expression of how we do that is through gardening. You know, that's the bit where humans and the natural world come together. There's an interface there. So that's why often I spend a lot of my time explaining to people that permaculture isn't gardening, and there's so much more to permaculture than gardening. But it's also a really interesting metaphor for how we relate to the natural world. So I thought I'd show some slides on permaculture gardens, and also sort of give a bit more, just a few more jumping off points really, and context. So I hope this is of appropriate interest, and I think so. And how does this work? Oh, yeah. Sorry. Okay. This is a roof. This is the roof of, it's a back roof of what used to be the London Street Bookshop in Reading. And there was a kind of a one-story addition onto the back of a big building, and some car parks and stuff there. And the building was used as a sort of a development education centre, so an educational charity to talk about human rights and fair trade and environment and permaculture. Anyway, long story short, the roof was leaking. And as a stretched, charitable organisation with this big old building that never have the money to do anything properly, if you're an organisation, and as an organisation, say a charitable trust that does education, has responsibilities for education, it's then actually very difficult to raise money for a hole in a roof, because that's not what you do. That's not what people are used to supporting you for. So myself and Martin Mikhail and a couple of other people had a few conversations quite a few years ago now about how could we resolve this horrible, dirty roof that leaked and was covered in all these sort of, the flat roofs don't work very well, do they? And they actually, we're seeing biological succession happening on there because it hasn't been maintained enough. And in some ways it's going to turn into, it's going to have the weight of grasses and things built up onto it. So we're trying to think, how could we, and look, there's drainage things here, you can see, and these are looking like roof lights that let light in, and I think there's some ventilation cowls there as well. So it's a complicated, horrible, ugly thing. And I remember standing out, and climbed out of a window, and we're standing out there quite some years ago, and think, how can we turn this problem into a solution? How can we use a permaculture sort of flip to turn this, well, basically it's a huge headache and responsibility to fix. Can we turn it into an asset? How do we do that? Roof garden. Educational resource. We could put in plants from all around the world that show our relationship to the natural world, show how maybe our food plants have been caretaken, and those seeds, where do those varieties come from? The potato is 5,000 years old. The banana is 7,000 years old. We owe our food plants to our ancestors in so many different ways. Could we make a garden that reflects the values of the Risk Center, which was about kind of international solidarity, fair trade? Could we represent other cultures and other kind of food plant types from different continents? Could we perhaps, in a permaculture way, do a food forest? Could it be a medicinal herbal food forest that was also educational, and also perhaps you could bring the public into and it make them think about their relationship to nature? This was the conversation we had when it stood on the roof, as a just a total blue sky thinking, what can we do kind of thing. It's quite long and thin. I seem to remember it's 70 meters long and maybe 7 meters wide, or was it 10, something like that maybe. And again, it's complicated, difficult shape. This is right in Reading Town Centre. This is part of the Reading. This is actually 39 London Street is this building. This is 37 and this is 35. They're long, thin buildings. And then it's got this sort of facade on the front that goes onto a main road, where it's a big classic building. A couple of years later, I get a phone call. 2002, I just walked out of Centre for Alternative Technology. I spent 7 years working there. Been a very positive experience, but they burned me out. It was hard work. And hey, Lydia. Noswaithar. How are you, Lydia? Hi. You're turned off. It's okay, I'll carry on. Okay. No.
No. Oops. Oh,
yes.
No, yeah.
Oh, now she's gone off again.
One. Mute or unmute?
If you want to say something, you have to be unmute.
Okay.
But when I'm talking, then it's good to go on to mute because we'll get an echo.
Okay.
No, I'm just saying nice to see you, that's all.
Yeah, same.
So this is a roof in Reading, Lydia, and it was leaking. And we kind of tried to think problem solution. Could we come up with a permaculture solution? And we kind of sketched out a very, very rough idea that we could do some kind of educational permaculture roof garden. Wouldn't that be nice? So then, I don't know, a couple of years later, I get a phone call and they said, Steve, do you remember that conversation? They said, we've actually got the funding to do it. And we just started the project, and our project coordinators, I don't know, got pregnant, got married, leaving country, whatever. And we just can't find anyone else with a sort of permaculture educational background. Can you come and help with the project? So it had just been an idea, and then suddenly I was back there kind of being a sort of the custodian of this project. So it was a wonderful process. So roof gardens, This is a sedum roof. This is, sedums are little succulents. They can grow on like rock ledges. Don't really need much soil. They kind of, and they've got a very fine net of roots that kind of will soak up any rain, and obviously they store that moisture in the succulents of the plant. It's very, very good to have sedum roofs. They clean and filtrate water. They help catch and store carbon. They rehumidify the atmosphere. They provide insect nesting sites, and of course feed birds and actually create bird nesting sites also. So very, very valuable. But we didn't want to do a sedum roof. We wanted to go large. We wanted to do a Robert Hart inspired multi-layered food forest. Can just go for it with as much diversity as we could. And this is the view from the other side. So this is the brick facade. This is number 35. Sorry, 37. That's 39 on the street, and this is wherever the other one was. And there's our little wind turbine, which we used to charge up a battery for a water pump. And there you can start to see there's the roof garden behind. So you can see with the building's on 3 layers up, but the garden's sort of just tucked behind it. And there's just the Reading roofscape. Strange mixture of old and new buildings. A funny place. Not much refuge for birds. Not much, you think about it from a wildlife point of view, how would they navigate through that landscape? And how perhaps important green spaces in cities really, really can be. So we've got this long, thin space. And the idea was, well, okay, can we create lots of edge? Can we create an interesting, we want to be able to make the space feel as big as it possibly can be, even though it's only 70 meters long and 7 across. So this is a hard path suitable for whatever, wheelchairs or carriers or whatever. Hard path taking a winding route to the far end where there's a gravel area with a sort of different environment. We thought we'd create a seating area, a forest area, and then a kind of more of a little traditional garden area. So we had sort of contrast, diversity. Do you remember this is an educational garden as well? So form follows function. We've got to think about fulfilling the needs of a development education centre. We put a little renewable energy system in to pump the water. So a clever thing, big thing about this garden is the rainfall that lands on the roof all drains into a tank down here below, and then is at night time is pumped around through a micro irrigation system by the power from the wind turbine. Well, it didn't always work, but that's the theory. So these were things layered into it to make it educational. So each we wanted to build a system that had multiple functions. So the first function of the garden was education, because Risk was an educational centre. We supported that function by putting in interesting technologies, design ideas, and interesting choices of plants. Things that represented global connections, historical stories, and just fun things that we could make and play with. This is the kind of permaculture sort of approach to gardens. And what other functions were? Well, actually, other functions were the roof was leaking. So actually, it fixed the leaks in the roof. The next function was the room below, which is actually a function room. It's a conference room, a conference area. And it gets cold in there because the roof isn't insulated. So by fixing the roof, we could resolve the holes and add a layer of thermal insulation, which also acts as sound insulation, which means that they can have more public events in there without affecting the neighbors. So we're educational, we're fixing the roof, we're providing genuine habitat for wildlife and biodiversity, multiple functions. It turns out that one of the functions of the garden is it slows the flow of water, it slows the return of rainwater to the urban drainage system. Because think about this, every inch of Reading has got pavement slabs on it and cars parked and houses built on it and office blocks and things. So the rain no longer percolates into the ground. You get a flood surge, a storm surge off the streets, which it becomes increasingly problematic. You've got to build a big drainage system to cope with that. And ultimately, that's water you wanted in the first place. As soon as anyway, I'll slow down. So what happens with gardens is not only do they filter and clean water, they store it. They slow down and they return a significant amount of the water as water vapor back into the atmosphere. Cities are hot and dry because they're covered in concrete slabs. So gardens rehumidify and soften the urban environment. We're now moving towards planning legislation where maybe every building needs to have some form of living roof, whether it's a sedum roof or whether it's something like the risk roof is, you know, and again, is mix and match. You can create ideas that fit a particular circumstance. You can grow plants in pots. You were talking about your back garden, pot garden, garden in pots, different thing. Anyway, here we go. So risk roof garden. From an idea, look, I already kind of showed you in my introduction talk, if you can visualize what you want, if you can think about the function that it's going to fulfill, then break that down into tasks to think about how you're going to, you know, achieve each step of it. Work out a shopping list of what you need to the elements that you need to build the system. And then this is the process that you go through. This is the permaculture design process. When you're doing something like a build or a plant, that's exciting. You can get volunteers, you can get helpers. People don't turn up for the boring bits. They don't try and strong arm people in to do the bits that are kind of drudgery. Get the volunteers in to do the exciting bits, the bits that they'll all be telling their friends about for years, taking great photos like this one. You don't need to know anything about this, but just from that picture, there's loads of people active, obviously creating a new landscape. It looks completely out of place because it's up in the skyscraper of a modern city. It's interesting, there's dynamics, a statement. It's so photogenic, this project. So again, thinking about education and communicating ideas, we're doing that through making a statement like this, a very powerful statement like this. So don't say when we're trying to think about the only upper limit of what you can create is kind of your own imagination. You know, how far can we go with this stuff? That's a jumping time. That's 2002 and that's 2005. And what I learned a lot from this garden, and one of the things is you never get to start a garden with a blank canvas. You never ever just, you know, start with, no, we didn't hear that. Okay. Sorry, I'd forgotten okay, I need to tell you some more things. But it's, when we started to create the shopping list of things that we want, and we were trying to stay within permaculture design, we want everything to be recycled. We want everything to be somehow pulled out of the waste stream or genuinely renewable as a resource. And also, can we do it in a way in which it relates to skills and services and abilities that are within, you know, the social set networks, if you like, that we want to help try and reinforce, or the areas of the community that we want to reach. All of those decisions, any way you allocate resource in any way, is connecting you somehow to a community. And if you, as a community education center like RISC, you could do that really strategically. You can invite, I don't know, the Pakistani women's support group or something on one day, and you have so many different user groups use the conference center below. So we also had this challenge or opportunity to build relationships between the garden and the people who are using the building, which again is that's what makes for a community garden. So already this morning I was talking about engineering relationships, these mutually beneficial relationships. How can we bring those into design? So the soil is the washings from a potato factory, from where they make chips, rather, where they wash the potatoes, and they end up with bags of loam. And so we could get good quality soil that was, if you like, was a byproduct of food processing. We mixed it with horse manure and food waste compost, and mulched it with newspapers. So all things out of the local waste stream as far as we could achieve it. The path is crushed, reset stone. We've got woven hazel edges to the garden. You know, everywhere we could stay within. In every way that we could make a conscious decision, it was always to stay within the permaculture ethic, stay within that local and natural materials, stay within the no waste way of thinking. So create a variety of different environments within the garden, so you can have different conversations. I developed a guided tour. I could walk around the garden and I'll touch on all 12 permaculture principles, even without necessarily naming them, but touch on all of those key concepts about, or whether we're talking about symbiosis or stacked and layered systems, or about the relationships between different plants and how the compost systems or the mycorrhizal fungi, or how all of these things. So start to try and get people to see it as a system, to try to understand how it might all work as an interconnected sort of system. We've got on BBC Gardener's World at one point. This is about 5 years into it as it starts to develop now. It's really, and to say that we put 176 different species of plants in at the beginning, trees, shrubs, climbers, herbaceous plants, loads of different herbs, fungi, all sorts of different things, everything we could think of. And also, mainly, each plant to go into the garden had to have multiple uses. It had to have at least 3 functions. It had to be edible, medicinal, good for insects, maybe good for basketry, or the interesting fibers or smells, and many of them had 4, 5, or 6 different things. So it was this idea of diversity of multifunctional plants put in a diverse relationship on top of a roof that represents a community of very diverse people. So that's kind of how permaculture is that, right? So but really seriously, we're trying to make a statement of thinking about how, with time and with planning, how can you begin to express these ideas in a way in which you're genuinely fulfilling functions, you're genuinely creating something that's of great value. And human experiences in nature is of great value, because you've got to go to get up there. You have to go up an external ladder, or there's a door from within the building. But it's a controlled environment, so it's totally safe. You can manage how people enter and leave the building, so you could work with any kind of groups of people there. And it's on top of a conference center. So if ever, I do go back and teach there. I do sometimes hire it and do training and stuff there, but it's a bit expensive, but which is great because the project of building itself has developed so much. My colleague Dave Richards, who I originally started Sector 39 with, he's a very interesting guy, half Chinese and half Welsh, so kind of interesting, and with a kiwi vine and all the different plants on mulberries. It's looking up from within the training centre now. You can see through the roof lights and start to get this lovely green dappled light. It's like being under the forest on a sunny day. It's really lovely. So it's changed how the whole building feels even. This is a daylily, an edible hemerocallis daylily. It's a ginger flower, a medlar fruit. It's a Chinese blue sausage fruit tree. Decaisnia fargesi. There's some crazy kind of edible perennial plants out there. Loquat, bamboo. So we had a lot of fun combining all of these different species, these different plants together, and just seeing. I wasn't familiar with many of them, but we worked with a plant specialist. That's quinoa, shiitake mushrooms, again medlars. But it's more how it is as a system. That's it now, probably 13, 14 years old now. It's starting to really mature. And the main job, the maintenance work of the garden is pruning. That's it. And picking the fruit up. There isn't really anything else to do. There's no weeds because it's a closed system. No one's turning the soil. No one's creating bare soil. So the management is really, the management of the garden is essentially replacing the action of the large mammals that aren't in the system. Because if that was a real forest in a real natural world, would be browsing animals would be going through like deer and ripping off branches and chomping some of the understory, which actually helps keep the light coming through and keeps an open, diverse environment. You want light coming in from different angles to have that amount of diversity of plants. This is an Ugni molini in the foreground. It's from Chile. It has little edible berries. It's beautiful. So this is the potentials of what we can do permaculture in gardens, or permaculture in urban scapes, or permaculture as a way of kind of a dynamic educational space. That's a kind of a summer picture. That's an autumn picture. This is the cherry. This is the largest tree on the roof. But yeah, that's a roof in Reading. It's, and you just sort of see through to see the office blocks. It's awesome. And you know, the blackbirds fight over it. It's territory. You know, it's a prized asset. It's wonderful. This is my friend Dave. This is his little back garden in Reading, not little back, a lovely big back garden in Reading. Just as he's designing and establishing it, but he's used cordwood to create edges. He's created a really, really thick mulch of straw to kill off the grass, and then he's slowly bedding in. He's still got many in pots, but what will be his final kind of forest garden plants, growing on cables along the walls, espaliered against the wall here, cordon fruits. So he's exploring edges. He's exploring stacking. He's trying to think about a sort of three-dimensional type of garden that also leaves a lovely big open space for his daughters to run around and play in. So designing for function and creating succession from edges, creating a diversity of yields, and also a multifunctional space. So this is, again, kind of a permaculture. We're trying to integrate functions together if we can. I'm kind of ahead of the game, I think, but I'm kind of showing you where we're going with this. We're going to go back to soil and soil structure tomorrow, just something a bit more basic. But I think I wanted to kind of, you know, sort of set the imaginations going a little bit, and to kind of see that how perhaps we can work with these things in different kinds of circumstances. So these deep mulch beds could be just on tarmac, you know, Lindsay. It doesn't necessarily, it's great that it is on the ground and it's in contact with the soil, but you can start building up. So yes, one of the things I thought about showing this slideshow, sorry, was, that isn't a very good photo, but is the soil is 30 centimeters deep. That's all it is. And that can sustain that much life. We do pump water around and recirculate water, but that's because it's very free draining, because it's sat on a special drainage substrate or fabric, obviously, because you can't have too much weight of water on the roof. So that's a consideration. But otherwise, all of this is supported by 30 centimeters of soil. So I see possibilities everywhere. I love living willow structures, just multifunctional design. But willows are multifunctional because they flower very early in the year. They produce a lot of pollen early in the year, and they feed bees and insects. They sort of start the season off. That's a kid's play space, shady sort of crawl space, fun plus space. These are, just espalier apples. This was another edge story, really, was working with a school in Reading where we wanted to get about, 26 apple trees in around their playground. And they were really worried about giving up any space until, because the kids play football, they'll play tick or whatever it is they play. But then explain to them we could if they just give us a foot in front of each, a foot around the edge of the hedges, the fences, we can espalier the trees and stack them in sort of a two-dimensional tree standing up, orientated to catch the sun. You can add a lot of productivity into a very small space. There's a beautifully espaliered tree in Portugal. So again, multifunctional. It's a tree, it's storing carbon, it's building soil, it's producing fruits, and it's a fence, and it's a physical barrier. Thinking about combining elements together and functions together. This is a sheet mulch. Permaculture likes to be no dig. We like to, not that it's a rule. If you want to dig, you can dig, but you don't have to. And this was a school that wanted a little forest garden installed into the middle of this sort of playground area. It was sort of a nursery and infants kind of play space. And they wanted a tactile kind of, a sensory living play space instead of what had just been a load of concrete slabs. Kids always falling over and grazing their knees, so they were forbidden from going into this space. So we're going to regenerate it and turn it into a forest garden. We leave it up the slabs. Underneath the slabs, the soil is like concrete. It's clay. It's on the Thames clay. And for, I don't know, 20 years, it's been under these concrete slabs. It's just rock hard. It was very hot summertime as well. So confronted with that challenge, how are we going to bring that dead soil alive? I certainly don't want to have to dig it. It's rock hard. We can't get any machines into here because we're in a courtyard. It's just, that doesn't sound very attractive. So these are just straw bales, broke, not even to just like, not really even pulled apart, but just slices of straw bale. You know how they just kind of, it can sort of come off in almost in tiers and layers. And then on top we have put Zupu, high nitrogen compost. So the straw is the carbon, the compost is the nitrogen. We've got at least 10 times as much carbon as we have the compost. That's a really good soil making mixture. Okay, so, and think about this nitrogen, this compost is sort of like, that's the food for the bacteria that are going to break down this straw into soil. And in the process, this soil, like this mulch, like this sheet mulch, when it rains, it's going to soak up every inch. 3 inches of mulch can hold an inch of rain. So if we've got 8 inches of mulch, we can hold nearly 3 inches of rain in that, soaked up into that material. And a bit like how it works in the swale, that moisture is just going to sit above the soil, slowly percolate in, release nutrients that are going to get the microbes going, get the bacteria going. That brings in the worms. The worms start eating the soil and digesting the bacteria. The ecosystem starts to work, and slowly the soil comes back to life. And look, and actually see, I caught a worm in the process of coming up to collect organic matter and bring it down into the soil. So you can imagine the process of doing that. They're creating air holes and tunnels and aeration and just sort of exciting the molecules in the soil. And slowly the plants will take. We were looking for a suitable product to work with in a primary school. And when we saw, this is from Paynton Zoo, which is relatively close, I suppose, to Reading. And it's animal manure compost. It's elephant poo. So to be able to say that to 4-year-olds was an awful lot of fun. And they were running around with hands of this compost. Their teachers were horrified because again, it's elephant poo. Anyway, there you go. Fun and games. So this is our sort of little forest garden adventures, really, of using a little system that we evolved to come in, do a really big sheet mulch over an area of land, and then build established long-term perennial plant guild on top of it. As a sort of you do a lot of work. This is how a lot of permaculture can work. Is it's an investment up front, a big amount of effort, but if you establish a system that then can largely look after itself. Yes, you have to go and check on it. Yes, you have to go and move a few things around, do a bit of weeding. But generally, as it establishes, the amount of work you have to put into it goes down, because now the plants start to shade out the weeds. You start to get the kind of soil, because you're not digging and turning, you don't start getting certain kinds of invasive weeds anymore. And slowly the system becomes, it starts to act as a system, a bit like the roof garden in Reading. Now, what I learned a lot was applying the techniques we used on the roof garden, using them elsewhere. It's much less of a blank canvas, and it doesn't really matter how much mulch you put down, certain things are always going to grow up through it. But it gives you such a head start. It's like you start to, you almost immediately get right on top of it. So these are really simple examples, really, of us trying to understand, trying to apply what we'd observed from working with nature and into design systems. So just to give a little sort of insight into it, it's another fun school garden. Obviously, in compost, I will enlarge a lot on the importance of compost and composting processes. There's lots of different approaches to composting, and this is a food waste composter. This is a plant waste composter. We might have a woody waste composter as well. We might have a worm composting. We might use a bokashi bin. There's so many different ways. Once we understand that it's about the life in the soil, what Jeff Lawton told us earlier, that we're trying to create as much microbial diversity as we can, so that within the soil, so that we can have an increasing diversity of plants and other interactions. Okay, this goes heavily into gardens now. Well, that's the roof storage tank for the water and for the roof garden and the micro irrigation. But I thought I wanted to show a few of the see some applications, and again, just maybe one more thing this evening, but is playing with permaculture ideas. And again, this might be of interest to Michelle, as there's a couple of some photos from Harry from Newtown. Another very simple designed system using the natural principles, the ones that we talked about this morning. This is the community garden project that we developed in Newtown. The project's now called Cultivate. Whilst it was in development, it was called Get Growing. And the idea was similarly really to the roof garden, but on a bigger scale, was to create a permaculture environment where we could demonstrate lots of different techniques, lots of different approaches to growing, so that people could be inspired to try out different things. If we create lots of diversity, we'll create a niche or a possible connection to lots of different people. We wanted to do it in a way in which it gave us something to talk about, something to teach about, and also I just wanted to do it because I wanted the experience of making a hugel culture bed. And I will introduce you to Sepp Holzer later on the course, amazing Austrian hill farmer and Austrian permaculture pioneer. And he's tried out lots of different ideas because he's an amazing observer of nature. And he's always wagging his finger and saying, you know, you really must pay attention. You really must, nature's always teaching you something. So I built my hugel culture bed on contour because I wanted to try and trap water. So that was part of my function, was to create a reservoir for humidity. I'd done a little audit. I'd run around and had a look what was available in I haven't really given the backstory of Cultivate. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, we're starting a new horticulture training centre on a new site, and to just look around, see what's there. There was loads of rotting bits of wood, mainly poplar, dead and rotting. We found some construction waste, a big pile of rotting wool, loads of grass cuttings. We were making piles and cutting new beds, so we were creating lots of turf. We had some compost. We had a lot of compost actually, and those were the things that were lying around at the centre. And to a certain extent, some of it was almost rubbish that you might want to get rid of. Someone even said, "Can't we just throw all that in a skip?" And I said, "No, the problem is the solution. These are resources, not waste. We're trying to do permaculture here. Let's look at this pile of waste or pile of material and try and do something good with it." So I've been interested in the idea of the hugel culture bed because I've been showing Sepp Holzer videos for 20 years and I've never made one. And it's just an interesting idea of, this wood is rotten. It's already myceliated. It's already got mycelium working into it, and it's a bit squishy. You're not going to burn it. And it's not got any real intrinsic, attractive value or whatever. And there was a lot of it. The site was overgrown. It hadn't been, maintained in years, big hedges everywhere. Let's just get rid of it. So I got my A-frame. We'll talk about that a bit later, but I found the contour across the field. So I wanted the bed to be level. That's why it's curved, it's trying to be level. And those are my pegs where I've measured it. That's my carbon. Then I added this rotten sheep's wool. That's the nitrogen. So again, whatever's lying around, whatever's available, those are your ingredients. I made a series of 3 of them. When I say I had lots of help. And also you can see what we're doing is we're digging out the turfs big, thick pasture, sort of kind of tough ryegrass, and turning them all upside down so that then this topsoil here, this is going to be a path. So we don't want to waste this topsoil. I'm going to fill this up with wood chip, and I'm going to take this lovely topsoil and put it on top of the bed. So now I've doubled the width, the depth of the topsoil, but I've also put it on top of the rotten wood and the sheep's wool and anything else I could find, the rotting grass and all sorts of that kind of thing. Cymhari was an organisation that made compost out of food waste. So, and we had, when we started the Cultivate Centre, we had their very last batch of compost, and it was about 10 tons. It was an enormous amount. And so this is some of that going in to build this. Hügel is a German means mound. So this is a mounded bed, a Hügel culture. And the idea is, as it rots down and sits down, is this core of rotting wood in the middle becomes a reservoir for water. It's like a sponge. When it rains, water will become trapped in between the beds. So now I've got my wood chip path in place. Again, it's a sponge. So no plant likes to have its roots wet. Plants like to, unless it's a marsh plant, but big lesson, observation for me from watching the roof garden was it's very well drained, which it was relatively moist because of the system that they had. All of those plants really liked the fact, I could see they were really enjoying the fact that it's a really well drained soil, and it made me appreciate how much plants do like that. And what I've noticed with the Hügel culture beds, you kind of have the possibility of both outcomes, because you can plant the plant in the top of the bed where it's quite dry. It's got to force its roots to go down to find water. But when it gets down into the center of the bed, there's loads of moisture, loads of humidity in there. So the plants have got a good, well-developed root system and access to a good supply of moisture. We covered them in Mypex. We did that for two reasons. One, we had Mypex, and the other one was, well, all that turf would just become a grass bank. But what we realized was, if we left it covered for 1 year, we could then remove the Mypex. It's a woven polypropylene fabric. It does not break down in the sun, and it excludes the light from the soil. So all plants underneath that will eventually die. All the grasses and the roots and whatever horrors might have been in the things that we put in there, all of that will die, biodegrade, be consumed by fungi, be consumed by bacteria, and it's going to release a huge amount of energy, we hoped, to feed these pumpkins and squashes that we put in. So this is it's our growing system. So actually processing a large amount of what might have been waste. We're creating a sort of we put a lot of work into building this. It was a lot of work, but once the only time we watered it is then when those plants first went in, just to get their roots down, and then we just sat back and watched it. And I've got the date somewhere. This is probably very early June, but anyway, there's our little Cultivate team, and so this was our little story of our beds that's building. Obviously it's just like February, March, April, May, June, and then starts getting going July time. I love the patterning of the leaves, and they started to colonize the whole area. Just disappeared. It was insane. The whole raised bed system just completely vanished, and we had extraordinary fertility and abundance, enormous crop of courgettes and pumpkins and gourds and all stuff. So literally from the watering in the plants, we didn't do another thing for the rest of that cycle. So there's lots to know about Hügel culture beds, and I don't know much about it. I'm not saying I'm any kind of expert, but observe and interact. I just went into that with a kind of naive, how hard could it be? But it turns out there's so many things you could vary. Your choice of perhaps whether you put a lot of manure in the bed, it might grow a lot more things like mushrooms, or maybe with some of the Hügel beds really favor long-term perennial plants. So it might be quite good within a forest garden system. Imagine how you could use Hügel beds to channel or block water, or to reduce erosion, and also create very interesting growing environments. Another thing, I mean, before they disappeared, but as you realise is you don't have to bend over very much. Maybe if you've got a bad back, you could even construct the height of, there's no upper limits to how big you can make your hugel bed. Like I said, the only limit is your imagination of what you could do with these ideas. And all you're really doing is combining a very basic understanding of biology. I'm no major soil scientist. I might try and pretend I understand it all, but what I really know is I see the patterns, and I understand if I get carbon and nitrogen together in the right balance, and get a bit of humidity in there and put that in the sun, is I can catch and store a whole lot of energy. And maybe we could engineer this in all sorts of different ways. The Monoplex was on for a whole year. We left it there for the whole of the first season, Michelle, and then after we'd harvested it, we then took it away, and we got it's always been very low in weeds. I don't know. It's got a lot of rosemary and sage, I think, growing on it, more woody herbs. But it was such fun to explore and to really just take very, very rough, basic sort of permaculture ideas or basic understanding of these processes, and get such a spectacular result. So observe and interact. This is our, I'm inviting you to play. I'm inviting you to see everything as potentially as a resource. Realize that with interesting patterning by, allow yourself to try some different things and see what you learn from that. I always challenge people to start. We'll talk about compost in a bit more detail, but I would definitely start biodegrading things and start observing it as things break down. If the purest form of, if basically compost is the coming together of carbon and nitrogen, I thought, I started off years ago just getting piles of cardboard, literally, that's carbon, and adding very small amounts of nitrogen and just see what happens. And nothing happens, then it breaks down really quite quickly, because you just get to the right amount. And then you start to realize you don't know where it comes from. There's little red worms that start turning up everywhere, and then just start breaking it all down. So I'll show you, maybe I'll take some photos for you tomorrow. We've got various compost system experiments going out in the back here at Dragons, or better still, we might get a chance to look at some of them at the weekend. I'm going to pause there. I think we've done our hour, but and thank you very much for your attention. I've posted on the webpage, I've posted a film called Dirt. It's about soil. It's really, really good. It is an hour and a half, it's a bit long, but it's well worth watching. So I don't know if you have the time, the appetite, or come back to it. But these are, I'm trying to sort of give you things which are, in line with the thinking. So we're going to go to catch and store energy tomorrow, principle 2. And principle 3 is about obtaining yields. And principle 4 is about understanding that all of these things that we're setting in motion are systems. So I'm going to sort of touch on these next themes now over the next 2-3 days. That's where we're going to get to. And yeah, so enjoy. And you might have seen I've captured all of these these talks, nearly all of it, and posted them. The recordings will be there for as long as you need them to be, Lydia. They're on my website and on the Academy website, so they'll be there. And if we want to, we could put a password on it, so it's just for us, or that's up for you to decide. Anyway, okay. So, and yeah, cheers, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. See you tomorrow. Thank you.